Imagine a moment when an entire kingdom holds its breath. The king, known for his cold authority and untouchable power, interrupts the grandest day of the year to do something no one could ever have imagined. Before the eyes of thousands, he points to a woman everyone despises, a woman who, just yesterday, slept on cold stone in the shadow of the castle. No one understands why. No one suspects the truth hidden behind his actions. A hush sweeps through the crowd. Tears and shock freeze. Time itself. What secret lies behind this unexpected choice? Is it madness, revenge, or something that will forever change the fate of the kingdom? This story is not what it seems at first glance. Every moment pulls you deeper, closer to a truth that will leave no one untouched. Subscribe to our channel. Leave a like and tell us from which city or country you're watching, because this is a story you won't be able to stop listening to. The first light of dawn broke over the ancient stone walls of Elmsworth, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets as throngs of people streamed toward the castle. The air hummed with anticipation. Today was the day King Edward would choose his bride, an event that occurred only once in a generation. Nobles from every corner of the realm had arrived weeks earlier, their daughters adorned in the finest silks and jewels, each family hoping to secure the ultimate alliance. Among the crowd, nearly invisible against the backdrop of excitement, stood Amelia. Her dark, penetrating eyes surveyed the scene from beneath a tattered hood, her slender frame wrapped in clothing that had seen far too many winters. At 38, her beauty remained undimmed by hardship. High cheekbones framed a face that spoke of quiet dignity, while her hands, calloused from years of labor, clasped nervously at her threadbare cloak. Make way for the king's procession," shouted the royal guards, their polished armor gleaming in the morning light as they parted the eager masses. Trumpets sounded a triumphant fanfare, echoing off the castle walls as the massive oak doors swung open. The crowd fell, silent, thousands of eyes turning toward the ornate balcony where King Edward would soon appear. When he emerged, a collective gasp rippled through the gathering. At 40 years of age, Edward of Elmsworth cut an imposing figure. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a strong jaw partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard, he possessed the physical presence his position demanded. Yet it was his eyes, piercing blue like the deepest winter sky, that commanded attention. Those eyes had witnessed battles, weathered betrayals, and made decisions that altered the fate of kingdoms. Today they scanned the crowd with an intensity that caused even the boldest onlookers to lower their gaze. "People of Elmsworth," his voice rang out, deep and resonant, "I thank you for gathering on this momentous day." The nobles straightened. Mothers nudged their daughters forward, and fathers' hands tightened on sword hilts, a show of strength before the king who would choose one family to elevate above all others. What happened next would be recounted for generations. Instead of remaining on the balcony as tradition dictated, King Edward turned and disappeared through the doorway. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Moments later, the castle's main doors swung open and the king himself strode forth, flanked only by his personal guard, rather than the customary entourage of advisors and courtiers. "What is he doing?" whispered a noble woman, clutching her daughter's arm. "Has he gone mad?" muttered another. The king walked deliberately through the parting crowd, his royal blue cloak sweeping behind him, his golden crown catching the morning light. He moved with purpose, his expression unreadable as he passed by the assembled nobility without so much as a glance. The crowd's confusion deepened as he continued toward the outer edges where the common folk stood. Amelia had retreated further into the shadows as the king approached, pulling her hood lower. Something about his determined stride sent a chill down her spine. Surely he wasn't coming this way, yet each step brought him closer to her corner of the square. The crowd fell into a silence so complete that the flutter of banners in the breeze seemed deafening. King Edward stopped directly before Amelia, close enough that she could see the fine embroidery on his royal garments, close enough to smell the hint of cedarwood that clung to him. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand and pointed directly at her. "This woman," he announced, his voice carrying across the stunned gathering, "will be my queen." For a heartbeat, No one moved. No one breathed. Then, like a dam breaking, chaos erupted. "A beggar woman?" shrieked Lady Hartwick, whose daughter had been considered the most likely choice. "This is an outrage," bellowed Lord Blackthorn, his face purpling with indignation. The noble's protests quickly spread through the crowd, transforming into a roar of disbelief and outrage. Some laughed, certain this was some elaborate jest. Others shouted insults, their words cutting through the air like daggers. "Silence," commanded the king, his voice slicing through the tumult. His eyes never left Amelia's face. She stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. When she finally found her voice, it emerged as barely a whisper. "Your Majesty, there must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," he replied, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You will be my wife, and we shall be wed this very day." A single tear escaped Amelia's eye, trailing down her cheek. The king's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in the depths of his gaze, a shadow of emotion quickly masked. "Guards," he called, "escort my bride to the castle. Prepare her for the ceremony." Two armored men stepped forward, gently but firmly taking Amelia by the arms. As they led her through the parting crowd, the whispers became a torrent. "Witch. She must have enchanted him. Perhaps she's carrying his bastard. The king has lost his mind." Each step toward the castle felt like walking through a nightmare. Noblewomen turned their backs in disgust. Merchants who had once begged for Amelia's meager coin now spat at her feet. Children pointed and stared while their mothers hurried them away, as though poverty might be contagious. Yet, amidst the contempt, there were other reactions: common folk with wonder in their eyes, servants exchanging meaningful glances, and the occasional nod of something resembling respect. One old woman reached out, briefly touching Amelia's arm as she passed. "Perhaps the winds of change blow through Elmsworth at last," the crone whispered, before melting back into the crowd. Inside the castle, Amelia was whisked away to chambers grander than any dwelling she had ever seen. Ladies in waiting, their disdain poorly concealed behind courtly manners, stripped away her tattered clothing and bathed her in scented water. They scrubbed her skin until it glowed, combed the tangles from her long dark hair, and dressed her in a gown of ivory silk that felt impossibly light against her skin. "Why?" Amelia asked as they worked, her voice barely audible. "Why would he choose me?" None would meet her eye, none would answer. "The king's reasons are his own," said the eldest handmaiden finally, her tone clipped. "It is not our place to question." As they placed a delicate silver circlet upon her head, Amelia caught her reflection in a polished mirror, the woman staring. Back was a stranger, regal, beautiful, yet her eyes remained the same, filled with questions and a quiet strength born of survival. The chapel bells began to toll, their solemn peal announcing the impending ceremony. Outside, the kingdom held its breath. King Edward waited at the altar, his expression inscrutable as Amelia was led down the aisle. The cathedral, hastily prepared for this unexpected union, was filled with courtiers whose shock had given way to calculated observation. No one applauded, no one smiled. The usual joy of a royal wedding was replaced by a tension so thick it seemed to press against the stained glass windows. Amelia moved with surprising grace, her back straight, her eyes forward. If this was to be her fate, to be made a spectacle, to be thrust into a role she never sought, she would face it with the same dignity that had sustained her through years of hardship. When she reached the altar and stood beside the king, he turned to face her. For the first time, something in his expression softened, almost imperceptibly. He took her hand in his, and she was surprised by the gentleness of his touch. The bishop began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the cathedral. When the time came for the exchange of rings, the king slipped a band of gold onto Amelia's finger. As he did so, he leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Forgive me," he whispered, words meant for her alone. This was the only way. Amelia's heart thundered in her chest. The only way for what? What game was this man playing, and why had he chosen her as a piece on his board? When she spoke her vows, her voice did not tremble. when the bishop pronounced them husband and wife. She did not flinch. But as the king leaned in to seal their union with the traditional kiss, she saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Not cruelty or madness, but fear. The most powerful man in the kingdom was afraid. His lips brushed hers briefly, formally, yet Amelia felt something pass between them. An unspoken current of recognition, as though they were both actors in a play neither had chosen. As they turned to face the assembled court, King Edward raised their joined hands. "I present to you your queen," he announced, his voice reverberating through the cathedral. The courtiers bowed and curtsied, their faces masks of propriety, while their eyes burned with questions and resentment. No cheers erupted, no blessings were shouted. Only the formal acknowledgement required by protocol. The royal couple processed down the aisle, and as they reached the great doors of the cathedral, they paused. Beyond lay the square where thousands waited to glimpse their new queen, some curious, some angry, all bewildered by the day's events. "Are you ready?" the king asked, his voice so low only she could hear. Amelia looked up at him, searching his face for any clue to his motives. Finding none, she squared her shoulders and nodded once. "I have survived much worse than stares and whispers, Your Majesty." Something like admiration flickered across his features before he signaled for the doors to be opened. Sunlight flooded in, momentarily blinding them both, and with it came the roar of the crowd, a sound neither of welcome nor celebration, but of a kingdom in turmoil, demanding answers to a question that echoed in every heart. Why? The morning after the wedding dawned with an eerie quiet throughout Elmsworth Castle. Amelia woke alone in the royal chambers, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar softness of silk sheets. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a strange dream. The pointing finger, the shocked faces, the whispered vows. But the weight of the golden band on her finger confirmed her new reality. She rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the kingdom that was now, by law, if not by acceptance, hers to share in ruling. The bustling courtyard below carried on with its daily routines, unaware of her observation. Servants scurried about, guards maintained their posts, and merchants delivered their goods, all part of the intricate machinery that kept the castle functioning. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When she called for entry, 3 ladies in waiting appeared, their eyes downcast as they curtsied with practiced precision. "Your Majesty," the eldest spoke, her voice carrying the slightest edge of distaste, "we have come to assist with your morning preparations." The title sounded foreign to Amelia's ears, "Your Majesty," a phrase that had never been directed at her. A woman who until yesterday had slept on straw pallets in whatever shelter she could find. "Thank you," she replied simply, refusing to show her discomfort. As they dressed her in a gown of deep emerald, adorned with gold embroidery that matched her new ring, Amelia caught snippets of their whispered conversations. "They say she bewitched him. Lord Blackthorn is furious. The Queen Mother hasn't stopped weeping since the announcement." Amelia remained silent, allowing their words to wash over her like rain. She had spent a lifetime being invisible. Now she was the center of attention, yet somehow still unseen, a curiosity rather than a person. When she was deemed presentable, the ladies led her through corridors of polished stone and elaborate tapestries toward the great hall. Guards stiffened as she passed, their eyes carefully trained ahead, while servants paused in their duties to steal glances at the beggar queen. The great hall fell silent when she entered. Dozens of nobles gathered for the morning meal, turned to stare with expressions ranging from open hostility to calculated assessment. At the head table sat King Edward, resplendent in royal attire, his crown glinting in the light that streamed through high windows. Beside him sat an older woman, whose regal bearing and cold eyes immediately identified her as Queen Mother Eleanor. When she saw Amelia approach, her lips curled in unconcealed disgust. "So," the Queen Mother said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "this is what becomes of Elmsworth's proud legacy." King Edward's jaw tightened. "Mother," he warned, his voice low but firm. Amelia took her designated seat with as much grace as she could muster, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. The king acknowledged her with a formal nod, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "I trust you slept well?" he asked, the politeness of his tone at odds with the tension surrounding them. "As well as could be expected, Your Majesty," she replied quietly. A servant approached with a silver tray of delicacies, more food in one meal than Amelia had seen in weeks. As she reached for a piece of bread, Queen Mother Eleanor made a small, derisive sound. "Perhaps we should begin with lessons on which utensil to use," she remarked, eyeing Amelia's hand. "Unless eating with one's fingers is the custom where you come from." Several nobles tittered behind their hands. Amelia's cheeks burned, but she met the older woman's gaze steadily. "Where I come from, Your Highness, we are grateful for any food at all." Something flickered in Edward's eyes, approval perhaps, before he turned to address a question from his chancellor. The meal continued in strained politeness, with conversation flowing around Amelia as though she were invisible once more. As servants cleared the tables, a commotion at the hall's entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of provincial lords had arrived, their travel-stained cloaks indicating a hard ride to reach the castle. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded Lord Reginald, a burly man with a shock of red hair. "We receive word that King Edward has married, yet no banns were posted, no invitations sent." The hall erupted in renewed tension as Edward rose to his feet. "My lords, your concerns are noted, but my choice of queen is made and sanctified before God and crown." "A beggar woman!" exclaimed another lord. "How are we to explain this to our allies? To our enemies?" Amelia sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap as the men argued about her as though she were a horse at auction. She had expected this, the shock, the outrage, the political ramifications, yet experiencing it firsthand cut deeper than she had anticipated. As the debate grew heated, she noticed a figure watching from the shadows near a side entrance, a woman in the simple dress of a higher servant, but with an air of authority that suggested importance. When their eyes met, the woman gave an almost imperceptible nod before slipping away. Edward eventually dismissed the gathering, promising a formal council meeting later that day. As the nobles dispersed, still muttering their discontent, he turned to Amelia. "Walk with me," he said, not a request but a command. They strolled in silence through the castle gardens, guards maintaining a discreet distance. When they reached a secluded alcove surrounded by high hedges, Edward stopped, ensuring they were beyond earshot of others. "You handled yourself well," he said finally. Amelia studied his face, searching for answers. "Why am I here, Your Majesty? Why did you choose me?" Instead of answering, Edward's gaze drifted to a distant point, as though seeing beyond the garden, walls to some memory only he could access. "Have you ever been to the northern villages?" he asked unexpectedly. The question caught her off guard. "Yes, many times. I've traveled throughout the kingdom. 7 years ago there was a terrible storm in those parts. Flooding destroyed entire villages." Amelia's heart began to pound as fragments of memory stirred. A storm, a stranger, a small cottage on the edge of a forest. "I remember," she said softly. Edward turned to her, his eyes intense. "Do you remember a wounded traveler? A man who claimed to be a merchant, seeking shelter from the deluge?" The realization crashed over her like a wave. "That was you?" His silence was confirmation enough. Memories flooded back. A man stumbling through her door, blood seeping from a gash on his side, his fine clothes muddied beyond recognition. She had tended his wounds, shared her meager rations, kept him warm through 3 days of fever. "You saved my life," Edward said simply. "I never forgot." Before Amelia could respond, a page approached with a message that demanded the king's immediate attention. Edward nodded curtly, the momentary openness vanishing behind his royal mask. "We will speak more of this later," he promised, then added, in a lower voice, "Trust no one here. Not yet." As he strode away, Amelia was left with more questions than answers. and the unsettling feeling that there was far more to this story than a king's gratitude for a past kindness. That evening, after enduring hours of thinly veiled insults and scrutiny from the court, Amelia returned to her chambers exhausted. As her attendants helped her prepare for the night, she noticed a small piece of parchment that had been slipped beneath her pillow. Dismissing the ladies, she waited until the door closed behind them before unfolding the note. Written in a careful hand were words that sent a chill down her spine. "The king's secret is known. Beware the moon's third rising." Amelia stared at the message, her fingers trembling slightly. What secret? And what would happen when the moon reached its third night? Outside her window, the first evening star appeared in the darkening sky, a silent witness to the beginning of a game whose rules she did not yet understand. 3 weeks had passed since Amelia's unexpected ascension to queenship, and the castle remained a battleground of whispers and veiled hostilities. This particular morning found her seated in the great hall for what had become a daily ritual of humiliation, the court breakfast. "Perhaps Her Majesty might enjoy hearing about the lineage of Elmsworth's queens," suggested Lady Hartwick with a saccharine smile. "Though I fear such histories might prove challenging for one not raised with proper education." Amelia sipped her honeyed tea, hiding her expression behind the ornate silver cup. She had grown accustomed to these barbs, learning to weather them with a dignity that increasingly unsettled her tormentors. "I would welcome such knowledge," she replied calmly. "Though in my experience, true nobility reveals itself in actions rather than ancestries." Several younger courtiers exchanged glances, a few poorly concealing smiles behind their hands. Edward, seated at the head of the table reviewing correspondence, glanced up briefly. His eyes met Amelia's for a heartbeat, a fleeting connection that sent warmth through her despite the cold atmosphere. These momentary exchanges had become precious to her, small acknowledgments that beneath the formal distance he maintained in public, something else stirred. A touch of hands beneath the table during council meetings, a lingering glance across crowded rooms, words whispered in passing, "You're doing well," or "Patience, just a little longer." The Queen Mother interrupted Amelia's thoughts, her voice cutting through the hall like a blade. "I understand the kitchens have been reorganized at your direction," she said, her tone suggesting Amelia had ordered the castle burned. "How interesting that you feel qualified for such decisions after mere weeks of residence." "I simply suggested storing root vegetables separately from fruits to prevent early spoilage," Amelia replied. "A practice common among peasants, no doubt." The Queen Mother finished for her. "How fortunate we are to have such rustic wisdom in our midst." Edward set down his papers with deliberate care. "Mother, the changes have already reduced waste by a considerable margin." Lord Chamberlain himself commented on the improvement. The subtle defense silenced Eleanor momentarily, though her eyes promised future retribution. The rest of the meal passed in strained conversation about upcoming harvests and border reports. As attendants cleared the tables, Lord Blackthorne approached. The royal dais, his handsome features arranged in courtly deference that failed to mask the calculation in his eyes. "Your Majesties," he bowed, "may I humbly remind you of the summer tournament beginning tomorrow. Tradition dictates that Her Majesty present the victor's wreath." Amelia felt rather than saw Edward tense beside her. The tournament would be her first major public appearance since the wedding, an opportunity for the kingdom to scrutinize their new queen. "Her Majesty is well aware of her duties," Edward replied smoothly. Blackthorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Excellent. I merely thought some instruction might be welcome given the unconventional circumstances." After the Lord's departure, Amelia was escorted to her chambers where seamstresses awaited with final adjustments to her tournament gown. As they worked, pinning elaborate embroidery along the sleeves, Amelia gazed out the window at the tournament grounds being prepared below. "Will it ever end?" she asked softly, not realizing she had spoken aloud until one of the older seamstresses responded. "The testing?" "No, Your Majesty," the woman said quietly, "but it will change form eventually." Amelia turned to face her. "You speak from experience?" The seamstress kept her eyes on her work. I've served in this castle for 43 years. I've seen queens come and go. The strong ones survive. And the weak ones? The woman's hands stilled momentarily. There are no weak queens, Your Majesty. Only those who haven't yet discovered their strength. That evening, a grand banquet welcomed nobles from across the kingdom who had arrived for the tournament. Amelia entered the great hall on Edward's arm, her gown of midnight blue and silver drawing appreciative murmurs, despite the lingering skepticism about her status. She had learned to move differently now, each step measured, each gesture deliberate. The weeks of observation had taught her the language of the court, even if she remained a foreign speaker in their eyes. The meal progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Conversations flowed around her, alliances being formed, information exchanged, subtle threats delivered in polite phrases. Amelia listened more than she spoke, cataloging names and grievances, loyalties and ambitions. During the third course, a young serving girl approached with a pitcher of wine. As she leaned to fill Amelia's goblet, she stumbled slightly, spilling several drops onto the tablecloth. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," the girl gasped, her face pale with terror. Before anyone could react, Amelia calmly placed her napkin over the small stain. "No harm done," she said, her voice gentle but caring enough to be heard by nearby diners. "The wine is excellent, worth a few drops on linen, wouldn't you agree, Lord Chamberlain?" The elderly official blinked in surprise before nodding. "Indeed, Your Majesty. From our southern vineyards, a particularly fine vintage." The moment passed, conversation resumed, but Amelia noticed the serving girl's grateful glance and the thoughtful expressions of several courtiers who had witnessed the exchange. Later, as musicians played and nobles danced, Amelia found herself momentarily alone in an alcove, grateful for the brief respite from scrutiny. A shadow fell across her, and she turned to find Edward standing there, his expression unreadable in the flickering torchlight. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "The incident with the wine." Amelia studied him. "A small kindness costs nothing." "In this court, everything has a cost," he replied, his voice low. "But perhaps that is a lesson worth teaching them." For a moment, the facade of formality between them cracked. His eyes softened as they traced her face, lingering on her lips. Amelia felt her breath catch, the space between them charged with unspoken possibility. "Dance with me," he said suddenly, extending his hand. "People will talk," she murmured, even as her fingers reached for his. His smile was brief but genuine. "Let them." He led her onto the floor, and the crowd parted, conversations hushing as the king and his unconventional queen began to move together. Edward guided her with confident steps, his hand warm against the small of her back. "Everyone is watching," Amelia whispered, acutely aware of the eyes following their every movement. "Let them see," he replied, drawing her fractionally closer. "Let them see that I chose well." For that brief interlude, as they moved in perfect harmony to the music, Amelia felt a curious sensation. Belonging. Not acceptance, not yet, but a glimpse of what might be possible. The spell was broken when they returned to their seats. The Queen Mother leaned toward Amelia, her voice pitched for her ears alone. "Enjoy your moment, beggar queen. Such performances may win you a few admirers, but they change nothing. This castle has seen many women come and go, prettier and worthier than you. The stones remain, the intruders are forgotten." That night, as Amelia prepared for bed, she discovered another note hidden among her belongings. "The king's secret lives in the North Tower. Seek the truth if you dare to know it." She stood by the window, the parchment clutched in her hand, gazing at the distant silhouette of the North Tower against the night sky. What answers awaited her there? And did she truly wish to know them? Outside, the moon hung low in the sky. 2 days until its third rising. The sky above Elmsworth darkened ominously as afternoon gave way to evening. Thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, their massive forms illuminated from within by flashes of lightning that promised a formidable storm. In her chambers, Amelia watched the approaching tempest with a mixture of trepidation and strange comfort. Storms had always been familiar companions in her life of wandering. The day had been particularly trying. The tournament's opening ceremonies had proceeded without incident, but the weight of hundreds of critical eyes had left her exhausted. Now, as servants lit candles against the growing darkness, she dismissed her ladies-in-waiting, craving solitude. "Your Majesty should not be alone during the storm," protested Lady Agnes, the least hostile of her attendants. "The old tower sections sometimes leak and—" "I wish for privacy," Amelia insisted gently. "I find the sound of rain soothing." Once alone, she removed the heavy crown that had been pressing against her temples all day, setting it carefully on its velvet cushion. Her fingers traced the enigmatic note she had discovered the previous night. The North Tower. What secrets did it hold? And with the moon's third rising only a day away, how much time remained before whatever threat loomed would manifest? The first crack of thunder rattled the windows, followed almost immediately by a torrential downpour. Amelia made her decision. With the castle's attention divided between the feast downstairs and seeking shelter from the storm, this might be her only opportunity to investigate unobserved. She exchanged her elaborate gown for a simpler dress and wrapped a dark cloak around her shoulders. The corridors were largely deserted as she made her way toward the north wing, the few servants she encountered too preoccupied to question her presence. The North Tower stood apart from the castle's more frequently used sections, its ancient stone staircase spiraling upward into shadow. Amelia carried a single candle, its flame dancing wildly in the drafts that whistled through cracks in the mortar. Each step seemed to take her further back in time, away from the politics and pretense below. Halfway up the tower, the storm's fury intensified. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the structure, and suddenly Amelia's candle was extinguished, plunging her into darkness. She froze, waiting for her eyes to adjust, when the sound of footsteps above made her heart leap into her throat. "Who's there?" she called, her voice barely audible above the storm. Instead of an answer, a faint light appeared, descending toward her. Amelia pressed herself against the wall, considering retreat, when the light revealed a familiar face. "Edward?" The king looked equally surprised to find her there, his own lantern illuminating the confusion in his eyes. "Amelia, what are you doing here?" Before she could answer, an ear-splitting crack sounded above them, followed by an ominous rumble. Edward's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Move!" he shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her down. Several steps, just as a section of the ceiling collapsed where they had been standing, blocking the path back to the upper tower. For several moments they stood in stunned silence, dust and debris settling around them as rain poured through the new opening in the roof. The stairway above was now completely blocked by fallen stone, while below, the impact had caused a partial collapse that left their section isolated. "Are you hurt?" Edward asked, his voice rough with concern as he raised the lantern to examine her. "No," Amelia replied, brushing stone dust from her cloak. "But it seems we're trapped, at least until someone realizes we're missing." Edward tested the debris blocking their descent, finding it too unstable to safely clear without tools. "The feast will continue for hours, and no one knows where either of us has gone," he said grimly. "We may be here until morning." A small wooden door, previously unnoticed in the shadow of the stairwell, offered their only alternative. Edward pushed it open to reveal an abandoned chamber, once perhaps a guard post or storage room, with a narrow window overlooking the rain-lashed countryside. "We can wait here," he decided, placing the lantern on an ancient table that still stood amid years of dust and cobwebs. The space was intimate, barely large enough for the table and a bench built into the wall beneath the window. When Edward closed the door against the draft, their isolation became complete, cut off from the castle, from the court, from the roles they played daily. An awkward silence fell between them. Without the barriers of ceremony and public appearance, they were suddenly just a man and a woman, uncertain how to proceed. "Why were you coming up the tower?" Amelia finally asked, watching him closely. Edward's expression closed. "I might ask you the same question." "I received a note," she admitted, deciding on honesty. "It suggested there was something in the, North Tower I should know about, something related to a secret." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by wariness. "You received a note? From whom?" "I don't know. It's the second such message. The first warned of danger on the moon's third rising. Edward turned away, moving to the window where lightning periodically illuminated his troubled features. "Someone is playing a dangerous game," he said softly. "Then perhaps it's time you told me the rules," Amelia replied, her patience finally wearing thin. "Why did you really choose me, Edward? What is this secret worth threatening a kingdom's stability?" He remained silent for so long that Amelia thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of long-buried truths. "I told you part of it. You saved my life during that storm years ago, but I didn't tell you why I was there, wounded and alone." Edward turned to face her, the lantern casting long shadows across his features. "I was fleeing assassins sent by my own council members, men who believed I was too sympathetic to common interests, too intent on reform." "Who?" Amelia breathed. "I still don't know for certain. I was investigating corruption in the northern tax collections when I was ambushed. The attack was carefully planned, meant to look like common bandits." Amelia remembered the wounds she had tended, too precise for random violence, too deliberate in their placement. "You suspected treachery even then?" He nodded. "But I had no proof, no names. When I returned to court, I played the role they expected, the hardened king, interested only in traditional power. I've spent 7 years building a facade while searching for those responsible." "And now?" Amelia asked. "Now I believe I'm close to uncovering the truth, but they sense it too." His eyes met hers, intense in the flickering light. "I needed someone I could trust absolutely, someone with no connections to court politics, no possible ties to the conspiracy." "You needed me," Amelia whispered, understanding dawning. "But why marriage? Why such a public spectacle?" Edward moved closer, his proximity sending a current of awareness through her that had nothing to do with politics or conspiracy. "To protect you," he said simply. "As my queen, you have guards, status, protection. Any move against you would be an act of treason. You could have explained this before." "I couldn't risk it," he interrupted. "The castle has ears. Every conversation, every confidence could be reported. I needed your genuine reactions to convince the court this was not a planned alliance." The truth of his words sank in, along with the realization of what he had endured. Years of isolation, trusting no one, playing a role while searching for enemies in shadow. "You've been alone in this," she said softly, "all this time." Something broke in Edward's carefully maintained composure. In 2 steps, he crossed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with unexpected gentleness. "Not anymore," he whispered, and then his lips found hers. Unlike their formal wedding kiss, this was real, tender at first, then deepening with a hunger that surprised them both. Amelia's arms encircled his neck, drawing him closer as years of loneliness and weeks of tension dissolved in the warmth between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Edward rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan for this," he confessed. "I didn't expect to feel—" A noise from the stairwell interrupted whatever he might have said. They froze, listening as debris shifted, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. "Your Majesties," called a voice. "Are you there?" Edward stepped back, though his hand found Amelia's and squeezed it briefly before releasing her. "We're here," he called back. "The stairway has collapsed." As castle guards worked to clear a path, Edward turned to Amelia one last time. "We must be careful," he murmured. "More than ever now." "I understand," she replied, though her heart still raced from their kiss. "But Edward, you're not alone in this anymore." His smile, brief but genuine, warmed her more than any promise could have. By the time the guards broke through, King and Queen had resumed their public personas, dignified, formal, appropriately distant. Yet as they descended the cleared stairway, Amelia felt the ghost of his touch still lingering on her skin, and knew that whatever dangers lay ahead, something fundamental had changed between them, something no court intrigue could touch. The morning of the tournament's final day arrived with brilliant sunshine that belied the storm of the previous night. Amelia stood before her mirror as attendants arranged her hair with ribbons in the royal colors. Her reflection showed a woman transformed, not merely by the elegant gown or the delicate crown, but by something deeper, a newfound resolve that straightened her spine and lifted her chin. "The blue ribbon, I think," she instructed quietly, watching as Lady Agnes wove it through the intricate braids to match His Majesty's ceremonial cloak. The subtle statement of unity wasn't lost on her ladies-in-waiting, who exchanged glances in the mirror's reflection. Word of the King and Queen's adventure during the storm had spread through the castle like wildfire, embellished with each retelling. Some whispered of a lover's tryst, others of a secret meeting gone awry. None knew the truth, but all sensed the shift in dynamics between their monarchs. "His Majesty has sent this for you to wear today," announced a page, entering with a small, wooden box bearing the royal seal. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay a pendant of sapphire and silver, not ostentatiously valuable but exquisitely crafted, its design reminiscent of the wild flowers that grew along the northern roads where they had first met. "How lovely," murmured Lady Agnes, genuine appreciation in her voice. Amelia touched it gently, remembering similar flowers she had gathered to make poultices for Edward's wounds 7 years ago. The gesture spoke volumes, a private message in a public gift. As the pendant was fastened around her neck, Amelia felt a curious lightness. For the first time since her abrupt elevation, she was not merely playing a role thrust upon her. There was purpose now, partnership in facing whatever conspiracy threatened the kingdom. And something else, something that made her heart beat faster whenever she recalled Edward's lips on hers, the possibility of love. The tournament grounds buzzed with activity when the royal procession arrived. Colorful pavilions lined the field, banners snapping in the breeze as knights prepared for the day's final competitions. The stands were packed with nobility and commoners alike, all eager to witness both the contests and their unusual queen. Edward and Amelia took their places in the royal box, the Queen Mother conspicuously seated several places away, her disapproval radiating like heat from a forge. Yet today, her cold stares held less power. "You look radiant," Edward murmured as they sat, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Your gift is beautiful," she replied, touching the pendant. "Thank you." His eyes warmed. "It reminded me of your kindness. Then and now." Before they could say more, trumpets announced the commencement of the jousting finals. Knights in gleaming armor paraded before the royal box, each lowering their lance in salute. When Lord Blackthorne passed, resplendent in black and gold, his eyes lingered on Amelia with an intensity that sent a chill through her despite the warm day. The competitions proceeded with all the pageantry Elmsworth was famous for. As each victor was decided, they approached the royal box to receive Amelia's congratulations. Most bowed with formal correctness, a few with genuine respect, having witnessed her dignity throughout the week's events. During a brief intermission, as musicians played and servants brought refreshments, Lord Chamberlain approached with a scroll. "Your Majesties, the Council requests an emergency session tomorrow morning. There are concerns regarding the northern provinces." Edward's expression remained neutral, but Amelia felt him tense beside her. "What concerns, specifically?" "Reports of unrest, sire, and rumors of a witness who claims knowledge of the attack on your Majesty 7 years ago. He's demanding payment for his information." Amelia's hand found Edward's, hidden from view between their chairs. His fingers tightened around hers briefly before releasing. "We will hear the Council's report," he replied evenly. "Thank you, Lord Chamberlain." As the tournament resumed, the festive atmosphere felt suddenly hollow to Amelia. Tomorrow would bring them one step closer to the truth, or to danger. The moon's third rising would come that night, fulfilling the mysterious warning. The final contest, archery, concluded with Lord Blackthorne's victory. He knelt before the royal box, his handsome face animated with triumph as Amelia placed the laurel wreath upon his brow. "My queen," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent field, "I claim the champion's traditional boon." An expectant hush fell over the crowd. The request was customary, though usually modest, a dance at the evening feast, a token of royal favor. "What would you ask of the crown, Lord Blackthorn?" Edward inquired, formality masking wariness. Blackthorn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I ask for the truth, Your Majesty. The truth of why our king chose a beggar for his bride when noble houses offered their daughters." Gasps rippled through the assembly. The request bordered on insolence, challenging royal prerogative under the guise of tournament tradition. Before Edward could respond, Amelia rose to her feet. The movement was graceful, unhurried, drawing all eyes to her. "The truth, Lord Blackthorn," her voice, clear and steady, carried across the suddenly silent field. "The truth is that worth is not measured by birth or gold, but by character." His Majesty chose as any wise king would, looking beyond appearance to substance. Her gaze swept the crowd, meeting the eyes of commoners and nobles alike. "I may not have been born to privilege, but I understand the heart of this kingdom in ways those sheltered by wealth cannot. I have walked its roads, known its hardships, felt its joys." She touched the pendant at her throat. "The truth you seek is simple. Love recognizes love. Valor recognizes valor, regardless of the garments they wear." A murmur ran through the crowd, not disapproval, but something closer to wonder. In the stands where common folk sat, a few voices called out in support. Even among the nobility, several heads nodded thoughtfully. Blackthorn's triumphant expression faltered. He had sought to embarrass. Instead, he had given her a platform. "I accept your wisdom, Your Majesty," he said stiffly, bowing lower than necessary to hide his displeasure. The feast that evening was suffused with a strange energy. Amelia's words had shifted something in the court's perception. While some still regarded her with disdain, others approached with newfound curiosity, engaging her in conversation that went beyond mere courtesy. "You've won allies today," Edward observed as they shared a rare moment alone between dances. "That was skillfully handled." Amelia smiled. "I spoke only truth. Perhaps that's why it resonated." His eyes were warm with admiration. Truth is a powerful weapon, especially where it has been long absent. As the celebration continued around them, Amelia noticed the Queen Mother deep in conversation with Lord Blackthorn. Their heads bent close, expressions intense. When Eleanor caught Amelia watching, her lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. Later, as Amelia prepared for bed, her mind swirled with the day's events. The council meeting tomorrow, the moon's third rising tonight, the mysterious witness from the north. Each thread seemed to be drawing tighter, weaving towards some inevitable confrontation. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, she found Edward standing there, his formal attire exchanged for simpler garments. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice low. "There are matters we must discuss privately." Once the door closed behind him, something in his demeanor changed, the ever-present tension easing slightly as he stood before her, not as king, but as the man she had begun to know in the tower. "Tomorrow will be dangerous," he said, without preamble. "This witness, whoever he is, his appearance now is no coincidence." Amelia nodded. "The moon's third rising. Someone wants to force your hand, or spring a trap." Edward paced the chamber, moonlight from the window casting his shadow long across the floor. "I need to know, Amelia. If things become difficult, if choices must be made, you wonder where my loyalties lie," she finished for him, understanding his hesitation. He stopped pacing, turning to face her fully. "No, I know your heart. What I need to know is whether you understand what we face. To protect this kingdom, I may have to sacrifice much, including me," she said softly. The pain that flashed across his face told her she had misunderstood. In 3 strides, he crossed the room, taking her hands in his. "Never," he said fiercely. "I would sooner surrender my crown than see you harmed. That's what I'm trying to tell you, Amelia. These feelings between us, they've become a weakness my enemies can exploit." Her heart stuttered at the raw emotion in his voice. "Edward, I thought I could protect you by making you queen," he continued. I didn't anticipate this. His hand gently touched her cheek. I didn't expect to fall in love with you. The confession hung in the air between them, as momentous as any royal decree. Amelia felt tears gather in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so sharp it bordered on pain. And I with you, she whispered. From the moment you looked at me with kindness rather than pity. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that spoke of too many days of restraint, too many nights of longing. Amelia's arms encircled him, drawing him closer as if to merge their very souls. When they finally parted, breathless, Edward rested his forehead against hers. Whatever comes tomorrow, he murmured, know that this is real. What lies between us is the one true thing in a court built on falsehoods. Outside the window, the full moon sailed clear of a passing cloud, casting the chamber in silver light, the third rising, just as the note had warned. Yet in Edward's arms, Amelia found she faced the omen not with fear, but with resolve. Whatever danger approached, they would meet it together. Dawn broke over Elmsworth with a golden light that belied the tension gathering within the castle walls. Amelia stood at her chamber window, watching as the sun's first rays touched the distant hills, painting them in hues of amber and rose. Behind her, servants moved quietly, preparing her garments for the council meeting that would begin in less than an hour. She had slept little, her mind returning again and again to Edward's declaration. Love. The word itself seemed to shimmer in the air around her, both blessing and complication. His lips on hers, his hands gentle yet urgent. These memories warmed her even as anxiety for the coming day sent a chill down her spine. The council chamber, with its massive oak table and stern-faced portraits of former kings, had always intimidated Amelia. Today, as she entered at Edward's side, the usual whispers and sidelong glances were replaced by a brittle silence. The 12 council members rose with formal bows, their expressions carefully neutral. Be seated, Edward commanded, helping Amelia to her chair before taking his place at the head of the table. Lord Chamberlain, present the matter at hand. The elderly official cleared his throat. Your Majesty's council members, we have received troubling reports from the northern province of Westervale. A man has come forward claiming knowledge of the attack on His Majesty 7 years past. Amelia kept her expression composed, though her heart quickened. This was it, the moment the mysterious notes had warned about. Who is this witness? Edward asked, his voice betraying nothing of his inner thoughts. He calls himself Rowan. Sire, a woodsman who says he observed the ambush from hiding. Lord Chamberlain shuffled his papers nervously. He demands gold for his full testimony. Bring him before us, Edward ordered. 2 guards opened the chamber doors, and a burly man with a tangled beard and hard eyes was escorted in. His rough clothing bore the mud and wear of the northern forests. Yet something in his bearing suggested he was unaccustomed to such attire. You claim to have witnessed an attack on your king, Edward said, studying the man carefully. Speak your piece. Rowan shifted his weight, eyes darting briefly to Lord Blackthorne before settling on Edward. 7 years ago, in the forest beyond Westervale, I was hunting when I heard men approaching. I hid and watched as a group ambushed a lone rider, you, Your Majesty, though I didn't know it then. And what did you see? Edward prompted when the man paused. I saw the attackers clearly, Rowan continued. They weren't bandits as was claimed. They wore the colors of noble houses. Their weapons, too fine for common thieves. A murmur ran through the council. Amelia watched their faces, noting who appeared concerned and who remained impassive. Which houses? Demanded the Queen Mother, speaking for the first time. If you make such accusations, name the guilty. Rowan's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's what I've come to sell, my lady. Information that valuable comes at a price. Or perhaps, interjected Lord Blackthorne smoothly, there is another explanation. He turned to Edward. Your Majesty, isn't it curious that this witness appears now just when you've made such an unconventional choice in Queen? Amelia felt the atmosphere in the room shift, the true purpose of this meeting suddenly clear. This was not about the witness at all. It was about her. "What are you suggesting, Lord Blackthorn?" Edward's voice carried a dangerous edge. Blackthorn rose to his feet, his handsome features arranged in an expression of regretful duty. "Only that the council must consider all possibilities, including the chance that your Majesty's judgment has been compromised." "By what, precisely?" Edward asked, each word precise as a blade. "By enchantment, sire." Blackthorn gestured toward Amelia. "How else to explain a king who rejects every suitable alliance to wed a beggar woman? A woman who, by strange coincidence, once aided him in the very region where this attack occurred." Gasps echoed around the table. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the trap springing closed around them. "You dare accuse your queen of witchcraft?" Edward's voice was deadly quiet. "I merely suggest that the council investigate the remarkable circumstances surrounding this marriage." Blackthorn's gaze swept the table. "Particularly in light of rumors that this woman may have been involved in the plot against your Majesty's life." "This is absurd." Amelia found her voice at last. "I saved the king's life. I had no idea who he was." "So you admit you were present?" The Queen Mother seized on her words. "You admit you were with my son when he was at his most vulnerable?" The chamber erupted in overlapping voices, accusations flying like arrows. Through the chaos, Amelia's eyes met Edward's. In that moment of silent communication, she saw his anguish and his determination. "Enough!" His command cut through the tumult, silence falling instantly. Edward rose to his feet, his presence suddenly filling the chamber. "I will speak now, and you will listen." He moved around the table slowly, his gaze touching each council member in turn. "7 years ago, I journeyed north not merely to investigate tax collection, but because I had received evidence of corruption reaching into this very council." The confession fell like a stone into still water, ripples of shock spreading across the assembly. "I traveled in disguise, alone, trusting no one. And I was betrayed." Edward stopped behind Rowan's chair. "The ambush was well planned, the attackers well informed of my route. I should have died there." "But you didn't," Lord Blackthorn observed. "How fortunate that this woman happened to be nearby." "Not fortune, providence." Edward's eyes found Amelia's across the table. "I never told the full truth of what happened that day. It's time you all heard it." The chamber grew so quiet that the distant calls of birds could be heard through the high windows. Even the Queen Mother seemed to hold her breath. "The attack left me bleeding, my horse slain. I dragged myself into the forest, certain I would die there. Instead, I collapsed at the door of a small cottage." His voice softened with memory. "Amelia found me there, a stranger covered in blood and mud. She could have turned me away. She could have robbed me and left me to die. Instead, she tended my wounds for days, sharing her meager provisions, asking nothing in return." Amelia remembered those days vividly, his fever-racked body shivering on her pallet, her desperate prayers as she applied poultices made from gathered herbs, the moment his eyes had finally opened, clear and alert. "When I was strong enough to speak," Edward continued, "I told her I was a merchant, attacked by bandits. I revealed nothing of my true identity, yet she treated me with a kindness and dignity I had rarely experienced, even as king." He returned to his place beside Amelia, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. "For 7 years, I searched for those who had betrayed me. For 7 years, I remembered the woman who saved me without knowing who I was. When I finally found her again, I knew she was the only person in this kingdom I could trust absolutely." Edward's gaze hardened as he surveyed the council. "So yes, Lord Blackthorn, I chose a beggar woman over your noble daughters. I chose honesty over schemes, compassion over calculation, love over politics." The word hung in the air, love, spoken openly before the entire council. Amelia felt tears gathering in her eyes at his public declaration. "A touching tale," Blackthorn said after a moment, his voice laced with skepticism. "Yet it fails to address the witness's claims." "Ah, yes, the witness." Edward turned to Rowan, who had grown increasingly uncomfortable. "Tell me, How much did Lord Blackthorn pay you to play this role? The woodsman paled. I don't know what you mean, sire. No? Edward nodded to his guards. Search him. Despite Rowan's protests, the guards quickly found what Edward had suspected, a small silver insignia hidden within his boot, bearing Blackthorn's family crest. It seems your witness has interesting loyalties, Edward observed coldly. Blackthorn's composure finally cracked. This proves nothing. The council cannot allow sentiment to overrule reason. This woman has bewitched you. The only enchantment here, Amelia interrupted, rising to stand beside Edward, is the spell of corruption and greed that has poisoned this court. Her clear voice carried no trace of the fear she had felt moments before. I have nothing to hide. I saved a wounded man because it was right, not knowing he was my king. I accepted a marriage I didn't understand because I trusted there was purpose in it. She looked at each council member in turn. Judge me not by where I've come from, but by what I do with the position I now hold. Judge your king not by whom he chose to wed, but by his dedication to this realm's true welfare. A heavy silence followed her words. Then, unexpectedly, one of the older council members cleared his throat. I, for one, have seen enough of Her Majesty's character these past weeks to believe the king has chosen wisely, he said, his weathered face solemn. Perhaps too long have we valued bloodlines over virtue. Others nodded slowly, the momentum in the chamber shifting. Even the Queen Mother seemed less certain, watching Amelia with new assessment in her eyes. Blackthorn, sensing his advantage slipping away, made one final gambit. Fine words cannot change facts. I demand a formal investigation. You demand nothing, Edward cut him off. Guards, escort Lord Blackthorn to his chambers. He is confined there until further notice. As the stunned lord was led away, Edward addressed the remaining council. This meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene tomorrow to discuss the true issues facing our northern provinces. As the council members filed out, murmuring among themselves, Edward and Amelia remained standing together, united before the storm that had threatened to tear them apart. You knew, Amelia said quietly when they were alone. You knew it would come to this. Edward took her hands in his. I suspected. Blackthorn has opposed me since my father's death. He was in the north when I was attacked, ostensibly inspecting the garrison. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. What I didn't anticipate was your courage today. You faced them all without flinching. Because I finally understood what we're fighting for, she replied softly. Not just survival, but the chance to build something better. Together. Outside the window, clouds gathered on the horizon. Not a storm breaking, but one brewing. The battle was not yet won, but for the first time, the path forward seemed clear. Not merely survival, something better. Together. Word of Lord Blackthorn's confinement spread through Elmsworth Castle like wildfire, igniting speculation in every corner. By nightfall, the great hall hummed with whispered conversations that fell silent whenever guards passed by. Servants exchanged meaningful glances as they poured wine, while nobles gathered in small clusters, their loyalties becoming increasingly apparent in whom they chose to stand beside. In the royal chambers, Edward paced before the hearth, his shadow dancing against the stone walls as Amelia watched from her seat near the window. The golden light of sunset streamed through the leaded glass, catching in her dark hair and illuminating the worry in her eyes. Blackthorn will not remain silent, Edward said, his voice tight with controlled tension. He has too many allies on the council, too many connections throughout the nobility. What will he do? Amelia asked, her fingers absently tracing the pendant at her throat, the wildflower symbol that had become her talisman. Edward paused, his gaze meeting hers. He'll demand a formal hearing. He'll claim I'm unfit to rule, that my judgment is compromised. A bitter smile touched his lips. In their eyes, loving you is proof enough of that. Then perhaps we should give him what he wants, Amelia said quietly. Edward stared at her. What do you mean? She rose, moving to stand before him. A public hearing, not just for the council, but for all of Elmsworth to witness. Let Blackthorn make his accusations openly, and let us answer them the same way. It's too dangerous, Edward protested, taking her hands in his. If we miscalculate, we've been reacting to shadows for too long. Amelia interrupted gently. It's time to bring everything into the light. The intensity of her conviction gave him pause. This was not the same woman who had trembled before the court weeks ago. Experience had tempered her, revealing a core of steel beneath her gentle exterior. You understand what you're suggesting? He asked. Once begun, we cannot control where it leads. Amelia nodded, her eyes never leaving his. I understand, but I believe in the truth, Edward, and in you. Their foreheads touched, a moment of shared strength before the storm. Outside the window, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, silent witnesses to the pact between king and queen. Morning brought a castle transformed. The great courtyard, usually reserved for tournaments and celebrations, had been arranged with rows of benches facing a raised platform. Royal guards stood at attention along the perimeter, their faces impassive beneath polished helmets. Word had spread through the city overnight. The king had called for an extraordinary public assembly. By mid-morning, the space was filled to capacity. Nobles occupied the front rows, their rich garments stark against the simpler attire of merchants, craftspeople, and commoners behind them. The anticipation was palpable, a current of excitement and apprehension running through the gathered crowd. At precisely the hour of noon, trumpets sounded. The assembled people rose to their feet as King Edward and Queen Amelia emerged from the castle. They walked side by side, neither touching nor apart, their matching cloaks of royal blue billowing. Gently in the breeze, Amelia felt countless eyes upon her, measuring and judging. She had chosen her appearance carefully that morning. Her gown was elegant but not ostentatious, her crown the simpler version used for daily court business rather than the elaborate ceremonial piece. She wanted to be seen as she was, a queen. Yes, but one who understood the people she served. As they took their seats on the platform, Edward signaled for the assembly to be seated. Lord Chamberlain stepped forward, unrolling a formal scroll. By decree of His Majesty, King Edward of Elmsworth, this assembly is convened to address concerns regarding the royal marriage and allegations made by Lord Reginald Blackthorn, he announced, his voice carrying across the hushed courtyard. All shall speak freely without fear of reprisal, that truth may be served. At Edward's nod, guards escorted Lord Blackthorn to the platform. He stood proud despite his night of confinement, his handsome features arranged in an expression of righteous concern. People of Elmsworth, he began without preamble, I speak today not as an enemy of the crown, but as its most loyal servant. It is precisely because of my devotion to this kingdom that I must voice what others fear to say. He turned to face the crowd directly. Our king, whom we all have honored and served, has been led astray. The woman seated beside him, a beggar found in the streets, has employed means both unnatural and treacherous to secure her position. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Amelia kept her expression calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Consider the facts, Blackthorn continued. A king who has rejected every suitable alliance suddenly chooses a woman of no family, no education, no standing. A woman who, by remarkable coincidence, was present during an attempt on his life years ago. His voice dropped dramatically. Is this the behavior of a sound mind, or of one bewitched? The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned skeptically. Amelia noticed a distinct division. The nobility appeared largely receptive to Blackthorn's insinuations, while the common folk seemed more reserved in their judgment. Further, Blackthorn pressed his advantage. I have evidence that this woman's family has connections to known traitors who oppose the late king's policies. Her sudden elevation is not romance, but the culmination of a plot years in the making. At this, Edward rose to his feet, his expression thunderous. You go too far, Blackthorn. What evidence do you claim? Blackthorn produced a sealed document. Records from the northern provinces, Your Majesty. The woman's father was executed for sedition 15 years ago. Did she mention that detail when she rescued you? A shock ran through Amelia like ice water in her veins. Her father, executed as a traitor? It couldn't be true. He had died of fever when she was barely 20, a gentleman who taught her to read stars and mix healing herbs. This is absurd, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. My father was Martin Fletcher, a healer from Westervale. He died of sickness, not execution. Did he? Blackthorn's smile was cold. Or is that the story you were told? The records are clear. Martin Fletcher was hanged for plotting against the crown. His daughter disappeared afterward, a daughter named Amelia. The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations. Edward raised a hand for silence, his face pale but composed. Even if these records exist, which I have not verified, they prove nothing about the Queen's character or intentions, he stated firmly. Many innocents suffered under false accusations during my father's final years. I should know. I witnessed his paranoia firsthand. It was a bold admission. The late king's mental decline had been a closely guarded secret, spoken of only in whispers. To acknowledge it publicly was to expose a vulnerability in the royal lineage itself. The Queen will speak for herself, Edward continued, turning to Amelia with eyes that conveyed complete trust. Rising to her feet, Amelia faced the assembled kingdom. Nobles who had scorned her, commoners who had once been her companions, all waiting for her words. The moment stretched, pregnant with possibility. People of Elmsworth, she began, her voice clear in the sudden silence. I stand before you not as a beggar, nor as your queen, but simply as a woman who asks to be judged by her actions, not by rumors or ancient documents. She moved forward, away from the protection of Edward's presence. I did not know my father was executed. If Lord Blackthorn's records are true, then I have learned my own history today alongside you. But I ask you, does the fate of the father determine the heart of the child? Her gaze swept the crowd, connecting with individual faces. I have lived among you. I have known hunger and cold, yes, but also kindness and community. When I found a wounded man at my door 7 years ago, I did not ask his name or rank. I saw only a person in need. A murmur of approval rose from the common folk. Amelia continued, her confidence growing with each word. If helping the injured, feeding the hungry, and speaking truth to power are acts of treason, then perhaps we should reconsider what loyalty truly means. She turned to face Blackthorn directly. You speak of witchcraft and enchantment. The only magic I know is the transformation that happens when people are treated with dignity regardless of their station. That is the kingdom I believe in, one where worth is measured by character, not by birth. Something shifted in the courtyard, a palpable change in the atmosphere as her words resonated with the gathered people. From the back of the crowd, a voice called out, "Let the Queen speak true." Others joined in, their support growing from a murmur to a chorus. Edward moved to stand beside Amelia, their shoulders touching in a visible display of unity. Lord Blackthorn would have you believe our marriage threatens the kingdom. Edward addressed the assembly. I say it strengthens it. For too long, Elmsworth has been divided. Nobles isolated from the people they govern, commoners without voice in decisions that shape their lives. He took Amelia's hand, raising it high. In this union, I see a bridge between worlds. Not enchantment, but enlightenment. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Cheers erupted from the commoners, spreading gradually even among some of the nobility. Blackthorn's face darkened as he sensed the tide turning against him. Pretty words cannot change reality, he spat. Ask yourselves who benefits from this unconventional arrangement. Ask yourselves why a king would... I can answer that question, interrupted a new voice. All heads turned as the Queen Mother rose from her seat among the nobility. Eleanor of Elmsworth rarely spoke in public. Her appearance on the platform sent a ripple of surprise through the assembly. My son, she began, her regal bearing commanding instant attention, has always been stubborn. Even as a child, he saw paths others missed. possibilities where others saw only tradition. She moved with measured steps to stand before Amelia, studying her face with eyes that had intimidated courtiers for decades. "I did not welcome this marriage," she admitted candidly. "I thought it beneath our family's dignity. But I have watched this woman these past weeks. I have seen her endure contempt with grace, face challenges with courage, and speak truth when falsehood would have been easier." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the Queen Mother took Amelia's free hand in hers. "If my son sees in her the qualities of a true queen, then perhaps it is my vision that has been limited, not his." The gesture, so unexpected, so powerful in its symbolism, changed everything. Nobles who had been holding back now stepped forward to declare their support. Common folk who had been cautiously hopeful now cheered openly. Blackthorn, seeing his advantage crumbling, made one desperate attempt. "This changes nothing. The law is clear. A ruler whose judgment is compromised can be removed by council vote. I demand—" "You demand nothing," came a stern voice from the crowd. Lord Chamberlain stepped forward, clutching a leather portfolio. "I have here the official records from the northern provinces, not the selective extracts Lord Blackthorn presented, but the complete documents." He opened the portfolio, revealing yellowed parchments. Martin Fletcher was indeed executed, but the charges were fabricated by none other than Lord Blackthorn's father, who was provincial governor at the time. The revelation fell like a thunderclap over the assembly. Blackthorn's face drained of color as the Chamberlain continued relentlessly. "Fletcher discovered evidence of tax collection fraud. Money meant for the crown diverted to private coffers. He was silenced before he could bring his findings to the late king." The old man's eyes were hard as flint. "The same pattern of corruption the current king was investigating when he was ambushed 7 years ago." Understanding dawned across the faces in the crowd. The pieces aligned with terrible clarity. Not a conspiracy against the crown, but a conspiracy within it, spanning generations. As royal guards moved to restrain Blackthorn, Edward raised his hand once more for silence. "People of Elmsworth," he said, his voice carrying emotion rarely displayed in public, "today we have witnessed not just the unmasking of deceit, but the birth of a new understanding between crown and kingdom." He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled with pride and something deeper. "My queen has shown us all what courage truly means. Let her example guide us forward, toward a realm where honesty outweighs flattery, where compassion conquers prejudice, and where love—" He paused, his voice softening. "Where love is recognized as the greatest power of all." As the assembly erupted in cheers, Edward drew Amelia into an embrace that broke every protocol of royal decorum. Their kiss, witnessed by nobles and commoners alike, sealed more than their personal bond. It marked the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through Elmsworth for generations to come. Spring arrived in Elmsworth with an exuberance that seemed to mirror the kingdom's renewed spirit. Apple blossoms dusted the orchards in delicate pink and white. Meadows erupted in carpets of wildflowers, and the castle gardens, once formal and austere, now bloomed with herbs and native plants that Amelia had insisted on cultivating alongside the traditional roses. 1 year had passed since the dramatic public hearing that had exposed Lord Blackthorn's treachery and transformed a reluctant marriage into a partnership celebrated throughout the realm. The anniversary dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the royal chambers where Edward and Amelia prepared for the day's festivities. "You're certain about this?" Edward asked, watching as Amelia adjusted the simple circlet that had replaced the heavy traditional crown on all but the most formal occasions. "It breaks centuries of tradition." Amelia smiled at him through the mirror's reflection. "Precisely why it matters so much." She turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. At 41, Edward carried his years with a dignity that had only deepened with the challenges they had overcome together. The worry lines that had once creased his brow had softened, though his eyes remained as sharp and perceptive as ever. "The people need to see their monarchs as more than distant figures on a balcony," she continued. "They need to know we understand their lives, their struggles, their joys." Edward's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, a private gesture that still sent warmth cascading through her. "I bow to your wisdom, as always," he said, his voice low and intimate. "Though I fear the Queen Mother may never recover from the shock." Amelia laughed, the sound bright in the morning light. "Eleanor has surprised us before. Remember how she defended that proposal for the new village schools?" "True enough," Edward conceded. "She's become your most unexpected ally." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Lady Agnes, once Amelia's most reluctant attendant and now her trusted lady-in-waiting, entered with a bouquet of wildflowers. "From the children at the Eastern Orphanage, Your Majesties," she announced, presenting the hand-picked blossoms. "They wish to contribute to today's celebration." Amelia buried her face in the flowers, inhaling their sweet fragrance. "They're perfect," she declared. "Please have them incorporated into the garlands for the feast." As Agnes departed, Edward moved to the window, gazing out at the courtyard below where preparations for the day's festival were well underway. Colorful banners hung from every available surface, market stalls were being assembled, and musicians tuned their instruments in anticipation of the crowds that would soon fill the space. "It's remarkable," he said softly. "A year ago, I would not have believed this possible." Amelia joined him, her shoulder brushing against his arm. "Which part? The celebration or us?" His smile was tender as he turned to face her. "Both, everything." He touched her cheek gently. "You've changed this kingdom, Amelia. You've changed me." "We changed things together," she corrected, leaning into his touch. "And we've only just begun." The anniversary celebration had been deliberately planned to differ from traditional royal observances. Rather than a formal ceremony restricted to nobility, Edward and Amelia had decreed a kingdom-wide festival that would unite all classes in shared merriment. The castle gates stood wide open as people from every corner of Elmsworth streamed into the courtyard. Nobles in fine silks mingled with farmers in their best woolen tunics, merchants chatted with craftspeople, and children darted between adults' legs, faces sticky with honey treats being distributed freely from royal kitchens. On a raised platform draped in royal blue, musicians played lively tunes that set feet tapping and hands clapping. Tables laden with food and drink were accessible to all, with no distinction between highborn and low. The atmosphere hummed with a joyous energy that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the ancient castle. "It's magnificent," breathed the Queen Mother, observing the scene from a cushioned chair positioned to give her an excellent view of the proceedings. At 70, Eleanor remained regal in her bearing, though she had softened considerably over the past year. "I confess I had my doubts when you proposed this mingling, but there is something rather refreshing about it." Amelia, seated beside her, smiled. "Change can be beautiful when we open ourselves to its possibilities." Eleanor patted her hand with surprising affection. "You've taught an old Queen Mother many lessons, my dear. Perhaps the most important being that tradition without purpose becomes mere habit, and habits can become shackles if we're not careful." Their conversation was interrupted by an expectant hush falling over the crowd. Edward had appeared at the center of the courtyard, his formal robes exchanged for simpler attire that, while still befitting a king, allowed him to move freely among his people. "Citizens of Elmsworth," he called, his voice carrying without need of heralds or trumpets. "1 year ago, we gathered in this courtyard under very different circumstances. We came together in uncertainty and suspicion, divided by fears and ancient prejudices." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly as people recalled the tense public hearing that had changed everything. "Today," Edward continued, "we gather in celebration, not merely of a royal anniversary, but of a new understanding between crown and kingdom. The walls that once separated us have begun to crumble, and in their place, bridges rise." He extended his hand toward Amelia, who rose gracefully and moved to join him. As she crossed the courtyard, people reached out to touch her hands or cloak, offering blessings and thanks. No longer did they bow in distant reverence. Their respect was now mingled with genuine affection. When she reached Edward's side, he took both her hands in his. None of this would have been possible without the courage and compassion of our queen, a woman who knew hardship firsthand, who understood what it means to be unseen, and who now ensures that no voice in our kingdom goes unheard. Cheers erupted from the crowd, heartfelt and spontaneous. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes at the genuine warmth directed toward her, a stark contrast to the suspicious stares that had followed her a year before. "The changes we've begun are only the first steps of a longer journey," she addressed the gathering, her voice clear and confident where once she had trembled to speak in public. "The new schools in every village, the council that now includes representatives from all walks of life, the courts reformed to ensure justice reaches everyone equally. These are foundations upon which we will continue to build." Edward's arm slipped around her waist, a public display of affection that would have scandalized the court a year ago, but now drew approving smiles. "To mark this day," he announced, "we have a new decree to share." A hush fell over the crowd, anticipation rippling through the gathered people. "From this day forward," Edward proclaimed, "the northern forests where our queen once made her home will be protected lands, open to all for sustainable use but never to be exploited or cleared. And at its heart, where a small cottage once stood, a healing center will be established, continuing the work Amelia's father began generations ago." Emotion welled in Amelia's throat. The cottage where she had tended Edward's wounds had long since fallen to ruin, but its legacy would now be honored in the most meaningful way possible. "Furthermore," she added, her voice steady despite her feelings, "this center will train healers from all backgrounds, regardless of birth or station. Knowledge that once was guarded will be freely shared, that no one need suffer for lack of care." The announcement was met with thunderous approval, particularly from those who had known the hardships of illness without access to proper healing. As the celebration continued around them, Edward led Amelia away from the main gathering toward a quieter corner of the courtyard. A small garden had been created there, hidden from general view by trellises covered in climbing roses just beginning to bloom. "I have one more gift," he said softly, "though this one is private." From within his tunic, he withdrew a small wooden box carved with intricate wildflower patterns. When Amelia opened it, she found a simple key nestled on velvet. "What does it open?" she asked, running her finger over its unusual design. Edward's eyes shone with tender emotion. "A door I had installed in the North Tower, leading to chambers I've had prepared away from the formality of the royal apartments. A place where we can sometimes just be Edward and Amelia, not king and queen." Touched beyond words, Amelia reached up to caress his cheek. "You remembered." "How could I forget?" he murmured. "It was in that tower, trapped by the storm, that I first dared to kiss you. That I first admitted, even to myself, that what began as strategy had become the greatest blessing of my life." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the passion of new love, yet carried the deeper sweetness of a bond, tested and strengthened through adversity. When they finally parted, Amelia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We should return to our guests," she said eventually, though she made no move to leave his embrace. "They can spare us a few moments." "More," Edward replied, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "After all, it's not every day one celebrates finding the other half of one's soul." Later, as evening descended on the continuing festivities, lanterns were lit throughout the courtyard, casting a golden glow over the celebrations. Edward and Amelia circulated among their people, stopping to speak with elderly craftsmen who shared wisdom from decades of experience, listening to young mothers' concerns about community needs, laughing with children who approached them without fear or hesitation. The traditional distance between monarchy and subjects had transformed into something new. Respect remained, but fear and awe had given way to genuine connection. As musicians struck up a countryside dance, Edward took Amelia's hand. "Would my queen honor me?" he asked with a formal bow that was belied by the mischief in his eyes. "Always," she replied, allowing him to lead her into the circle of dancers. Together they moved through the steps of a dance once considered too common for royal participation. Around them, nobles and peasants alike joined hands, the distinctions between them momentarily forgotten in shared joy. From her vantage point, Queen Mother Eleanor watched with glistening eyes. Beside her, Lord Chamberlain nodded thoughtfully. "They've changed everything," he observed. "History will remember this reign." "Yes," Eleanor agreed softly, "but not for conquest or grandeur, for something far more rare and precious." She smiled as she watched her son lift Amelia in a turn, both of them laughing freely. "They will be remembered for love." As the night deepened and stars appeared above the castle walls, Edward and Amelia slipped away from the celebration, climbing the winding stairs of the North Tower hand in hand. The key turned smoothly in the lock of their private sanctuary, opening to reveal chambers warmed by a crackling fire and adorned with simple beauty. Here were no royal crests or formal portraits, only comfortable furnishings, bookshelves filled with volumes both had treasured, and windows that opened to the same forests where their story had begun. From beggar to queen, Amelia mused, standing by the window that faced north toward her former home. Who could have imagined such a tale? Edward wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Perhaps it was written in the stars long before we knew. Perhaps some stories are destined to be told, no matter how unlikely they seem. She turned in his embrace, her eyes reflecting the firelight. And our story? What chapters remain to be written? Many, he promised, drawing her closer, each one more beautiful than the last. Outside, the kingdom of Elmsworth continued its celebration, united in a way it had never been before. Inside their private sanctuary, king and queen, man and woman, sealed their commitment with a kiss that promised forever. Their extraordinary journey from survival to love complete at last. As this story closes, ask yourself, what would you have done if you were in their place? Would you have had the courage to forgive, to love beyond prejudice, or to fight for someone when the whole world stood against you? Sometimes, the bravest acts are not the ones sung in songs, but those done quietly, by hearts that refuse to give up on hope and compassion. Maybe this tale isn't just about kings or mendicants, but about the hidden battles we all fight, the longing to belong, the pain of misunderstanding, and the quiet strength it takes to believe in a better ending. What secrets do you carry that might change your life, if only you dared to share them? What would happen if you looked beyond someone's past and saw the truth in their heart? Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey. If this story touched you, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Your support brings these stories to life, and we're grateful to have you as part of our community.